Welcome to another video cast. I'm Bill English, the founder of Bible and Business. Welcome. This is another in our series of leadership lessons from the life of Moses. Today we're going to be in Exodus chapter 1, verses 8 through 22. And we're going to spend a lot of time building up the context and the reasons why we come up with the leadership lesson that we come up with today from the life of Moses. So I want to go ahead and get going on this, and I'll click over here. First of all, we are in Exodus chapter 1, verses 8 through 22. I'd like to read this passage with you. It's fairly long, but you might want to just read along with me, or if you're in your car listening, you might just want to listen here as well. Now a new king arose over Egypt who did not know Joseph. And he said to his people, "Behold, the people of the sons of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal wisely with them, or else they will multiply, and in the event of war, they will also join themselves to those who hate us, and fight against us, and depart from the land." So they appointed taskmasters over them to afflict them with hard labor. And they built for Pharaoh storage cities, Pithom and Raamses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread out, so that they were in dread of the sons of Israel. That's the Egyptians now. It's the Egyptians who were in dread of the sons of Israel. And so the Egyptians compelled the sons of Israel to labor vigorously or rigorously, and they made their lives bitter with hard labor in mortar and bricks and at all kinds of labor in the field, all their labors which they rigorously imposed on them. Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah, and the other was named Puah. And he said, "When you are helping the Hebrew women to give birth and see them upon the birth stool, if it is a son, then you shall put him to death. But if it is a daughter, then she shall live." But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt had commanded them, but they let the boys live. So the king of Egypt called for the midwives and said to them, "Why have you done this thing and let the boys live?" And the midwives said to Pharaoh, "Because the Hebrew women are not as the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous, and they give birth before the midwife can get to them." So God was good to the midwives, and the people multiplied and became very mighty. Because the midwives feared God, he established households for them. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, "Every son who is born to you, you are to cast into the Nile, and every daughter you are to keep alive." And the idea there at the end is that any Egyptian could come along and kill any Hebrew boy who had just recently been born. That's the point of that material. Now there's some problems here in this narrative. One of the problems that strikes out to me right away is, why didn't the king of Egypt just kill Shiphrah and Puah when he found out that they were disobeying him? We're not told that he did that. In fact, God gave them families after this, and so there are some other textual problems here that I'm not going to get into because it's not germane to this particular study. But Pharaoh, as you see, he comes up with the rationale that the Hebrews are too numerous for us, and they might join with an attacking army. So look at what he says here. "Behold, the people of Israel, of the sons of Israel, are more and mightier than we." So this is really a national security issue for Pharaoh. His people are a minority compared to the majority resident aliens who are the children of Israel. And so his solution could have been to make friends with them. His solution could have been to get along with them, or to figure out how to incorporate them more into the Egyptian world, or could have been to just set up different boundaries and give them a certain land and let them go. But instead, him and his advisors decide that the way to handle this is to enslave the Israelites and quietly kill the baby boys and make it so that the Hebrews are doing things to help build up the Egyptian kingdom while making sure that the male population part of the Hebrew nation, so to speak, is diminished by killing the young boys. And so it becomes really open season on all the Hebrew baby boys. Now, Pharaoh first wants to do this quietly, so he calls together the midwives, and they become the focus of this story and really the heroes of this story as well. And this is a quiet, private command that he hopes to commit genocide quietly. Now, two things. Why do we only get two names of midwives? And surely there were more midwives than Shiphrah and Puah, so why are they called out? Well, I believe that Moses calls them out for their courage and their faithfulness to God. And Pharaoh talks to them probably because they are representatives of the larger group of the Hebrew midwives that must have existed during this time. Now, there's a parallel here to Matthew 26:31, where Jesus is talking about Mary, and he says, I tell you the truth, wherever this gospel is preached throughout the world, what she has done will also be told in memory of her. I believe that Shiphrah and Puah are recorded here in memory of them, and for us to learn about their courage in civilly disobeying a law that clearly contradicts God's laws. This is what Dr. Stewart wrote in his commentary on the book of Exodus. The honor thus given is all the more evident when one realizes that neither Pharaoh nor his magicians, nor the elders of Israel, nor any other characters save those in Jacob's and Moses' families are named in the first 5 chapters of Exodus. So this is quite an honor, quite a deal for Puah and Shiphrah to be named here. So again, why is Pharaoh talking with the midwives in the first place? And particularly these two ladies. Kyle and Dalich think it's because they are representatives of the entire profession. And to further secure his nation's future, and this is from Pharaoh's thinking now, he wants young boys killed, diminishing over time Israel's ability to field an army that can fight against Egypt in the future. And so Pharaoh will try 2 ways to kill the boys. The first way, to work with the midwives to quietly have the boys killed, and if that doesn't work, then make a public law and basically make it open season on the Hebrew male babies. Now, the command for genocide was pretty straightforward. It came from Pharaoh. It says, when the baby is born, if it is a boy, kill him. If it is a girl, let her live. And you gotta kind of marvel at Pharaoh's naivety here. He really believes that these midwives who are trained to help bring life into this world, he really believes that they're going to go back and suddenly reverse what they do and kill baby boys? It seems to me that there must be more behind this story than what we're actually told. But the writer's intention is not to fill in all the details, I'm sure. It's to illustrate that there are times when God's law is above our laws, and instead of using men to illustrate that in this particular genre, the writers have chosen 2 women. And you got to think, though, the Pharaoh must have thought that they would agree. And he probably also thought that because he was not accustomed to being disobeyed. Pharaoh at that time was seen as a god, one of the many gods in Egypt. And you just didn't disobey Pharaoh. Whatever Pharaoh said, whatever Pharaoh wanted, Pharaoh got. And so you didn't disobey him. He was seen as a god. And so he must have thought that they would just go and do what he told them to do because everybody else does what he tells them to do. But in another sense, like I've said, he just comes across to me as being rather naive. He must not understand the Hebrews. He must not understand their culture. He must not understand their religion or their ethics or things that go with that. And so he commands them to kill the baby boys, and they disagreed. Now, Sarna, in his commentary, who is a Jewish rabbi, believes that they likely were offered a great reward for obeying and probably were threatened with death for disobeying. But that is speculation. We don't know that from the text. So in verse 17, what does it say? It says that the midwives feared God. They understood that there is a higher law than our laws, and that higher law takes precedent over our laws. Now, them standing up to Pharaoh, I want to put this in a more modern context. This is not unlike us being asked by God to stand up to Hitler, or to Stalin, or to Hussein, or to Ho Chi Minh, Mussolini, Idi Amin, Brezhnev, and others. These are ruthless men. If you disobey them, off comes your head. We just put a bullet in your head and get rid of you. And maybe we'll put a bullet in everybody's head in your family too. And we'll let you watch that while we do it. So this is really dangerous stuff that Shiphrah and Puah are facing. And I give you that modern day illustration so that you understand some of the import here of the Hebrew text. It says that they feared God. It doesn't say that they didn't fear men, but the implication is that they feared disobeying God more than whatever man could do to them. I wonder how many of us are in that boat. I wonder how many of us fear God or fear disobeying God more than we fear what men could do to us. I would venture to say that some of us fear men more than we fear God, sometimes at least. I think if we're honest with ourselves. And this goes along with Matthew 10:28. Do not be afraid of those who kill the body but cannot kill the soul. Rather, be afraid of the one who can destroy both soul and body in hell. So, Shiphrah and Puah here, to my estimation, are living out Matthew 10:28 and are basically telecasting into the future that there are laws above our laws, and that there is a creator and a God and a final authority above all the authorities here on this earth. And that when the earthly authorities and the heavenly authorities clash, disciples of Jesus Christ commit themselves to following the heavenly authorities and the heavenly laws, even if it means losing their lives. I got to say that this is tough stuff. This is not for the faint of heart, because civil disobedience is not about politics. Civil disobedience should only be, I think, on the part of a Christian when we're asked to sin by the state. This is what Dennis Prager, many of you will know Dennis. He has a radio show. He's also a Jewish man who has written a series of books called The Rational Bible, and he wrote this on the book of Exodus. Here's what Dennis wrote. It was the midwives' fear of God that liberated them from fear of the Egyptian tyrant. Now, let me read that again. It was the midwives' fear of God that liberated them from fear of the Egyptian tyrant. The point is often overlooked. Fear of God is a liberating emotion, freeing one from a disabling fear of evil, powerful people. This needs to be emphasized because many people see fear of God as onerous rather than liberating. And I think Dennis has a good point there. Shiphrah and Puah, they fear God, and that liberates them from having to be afraid of Pharaoh, because they know that they're fearing the one who can destroy both the body and the soul in hell. They're not worried about the one who can just destroy their body. This is what Jonathan Sacks, who is a Brit, and he's British, and he's also a lord, an English lord, and he's also a Jewish rabbi. This is what he wrote, and I think that there's some real wisdom here. If the image of God is to be found not only in kings but in the human person as such, then all power that dehumanizes is ipso facto an abuse of power. The story of the Exodus narrative is as much political as theological. Theologically, the plagues show that the creator of nature is supreme over the forces of nature. Politically, it declared that over every human power stands the sovereignty of God, defender and guarantor of the rights of humankind. In such a worldview, the idea of civil disobedience is not unthinkable, but self-evident. The very notion of authority is defined by the transcendence of right over might, morality over power. In one of the world-changing moments of history, and that's how Sachs looks at this, social criticism was born in Israel simultaneously with the institutionalization of power. No sooner were there kings in Israel than there were prophets mandated by God to criticize them whenever they abused their power. So here you have Pharaoh commanding the midwives to kill the Hebrew boys. And those midwives are coming along and saying, we're not going to do that. We're not going to do this. There is a power above you, Pharaoh. There is an authority above you, Pharaoh. There is a law above you, Pharaoh. And that's the law that we are going to obey. So what are the elements of civil disobedience that we see here in this lesson? Well, the 5 elements we find in the midwives are as follows. First of all, they feared God more than the king. They believed that there was a law above our laws, and that the king's law violated God's laws, because his laws are preeminent, not just a little bit above, but they are absolutely preeminent over all of our political laws. And there's a plausible explanation for the disobedience. Notice that they didn't blame the king's laws for why they disobeyed. They gave the king a plausible explanation. Now, I tend to think they were lying to the king. But I think in this situation, that lying is okay. You see, not all deceit is sin. Some deceit is righteous. And for me, in this passage, their lies are righteous ways for them to survive themselves and to continue ministering to the Hebrew women. And notice that since they were obedient to God's laws, that God rewards that obedience, and the presumed infertility of the midwives was removed by God because of their obedience, and God gave them their own families. So in verses 20 and 21, that's what we see. On the evangelical perspective is expressed by Kyle and Dalich and Stewart. Kyle and Dalich sees a causal connection between the midwives' obedience and them having families. Dr. Stewart did not see that causal connection. The Jewish commentators here, Sarna, thought it was more pragmatic. The midwives were barren, and they were just added to some other families so that they could be part of a family. And that was being put under state control. Prager here believes that the women were barren and had their own families, and Prager does see a causal connection. So verse 22, Pharaoh is unsuccessful working with the midwives quietly, so he takes his command public and really commands genocide. He empowers anyone to kill a baby Hebrew boy. Now, we don't know the effects of his public law. We do know, and we're going to telecast here a little bit into the future, we do know that his own daughter will disobey him in chapter 3 when she picks up the basket out of the reeds and finds a baby Hebrew boy crying in them. She doesn't kill the boy, and in fact, she disobeys her own father. So, what can we learn from leadership? What about leadership can we learn here? There's one lesson for today, and it is simply this. Christian leaders obey God's laws when they are in conflict with man's laws. Now, this brings up several thorny issues, and let me just use one as an illustration. I know of some Christians who don't pay all their taxes because they don't want to support the state funding of abortion. That's a tough one for me. God, we personally are not asked to sin by paying taxes, and when those taxes are used for evil purposes, that is not necessarily on us, on the fact that we paid them. But some Christians see it differently. And there will be other issues like that as well, where the effects of what we do when we're obedient to the state may result in sin being committed. All I will say is that I believe that we obey the state as long as we are not being asked to directly sin ourselves. So, for example, if the state were to come along and say, you cannot meet in churches larger than 20 people, would I obey that? My answer would be yes, because I can be part of a church that's less than 20 people. Now, would I like it? No. Would I speak out against it if I had the platform? Yes. But in the end, is meeting with 18 people for church a sin? No, it isn't. Excuse me. In fact, meeting with 500 people as opposed to, say, 15 might be, there's a lot more you can do with 500 people in a service. You can have some better music probably, and maybe some drama, and you might have a senior pastor who does the preaching. But in the long run, the church can still meet if it's only 15 or 18 people. Now, if the state came along and said you cannot meet at all to study the Word of God, then I would have to disobey that. If the state came along and said you are not allowed to pray to the God of the Bible anymore, then I would have to disobey that. If the state came along and said, because you're a Christian, we're going to tax you at twice the rate of anybody else, I would have to obey that, because that tax is not asking me to sin. Suffering is not the same thing as sinning. And so I may not like what the state does, but I will obey it until the state asks me directly to sin. And so there's some gray areas here that I think Christians need to be able to go to God and be able to say, God, I'm not sure what I should do here. Please tell me what to do. And reasonable Christians who love the Lord can reasonably disagree on some things. But the principle of leadership here that we get from the life of Moses in Exodus 1 is this: Christian leaders obey God's laws when they are in conflict with man's laws. So that's our lesson for today. Next week we'll get into chapter 2 in our video cast in Exodus, and we'll continue our study on leadership lessons from the life of Moses. I am Bill English. I'm the founder of Bible and Business. I have both a Master of Arts in Psychology and a Master of Divinity, both of them earned at Trinity Evangelical Divinity School. And I'm also a licensed psychologist here in the state of Minnesota. You're always welcome to get a hold of me by sending me an email at bill@bibleandbusiness.com, or you can send it to me at bill@theplatinumgroup, PLATIUMGRP.com. I'm a partner at the Platinum Group, where we do turnarounds and we help family businesses with succession planning. We do traditional M&A work. We do basically business advisory services at any point in a business's life where they are experiencing difficulty throughout the business life cycle. There's hardly anything that we can't help with at one point or another. And so I really want to thank you today for joining me on this journey that we're on about leadership lessons from the life of Moses. And if I can be any help to you, please don't hesitate to reach out and contact me. Thank you. God bless you, and have a good day.